They say rain, sleet, snow, or dark of night won't stop a mail carrier from making their rounds. It's an old motto carved into stone on the post office building downtown, simple and unyielding. A child can understand it. But when a veteran postal worker stands on your front porch at 7 o'clock on a freezing November morning, before the sun has even cleared the tree line, holding a manila envelope with a hand that's noticeably stiff, a weather forecast has nothing to do with it. That's when ordinary mail turns into something else entirely. That's when the paper trail of your life gets quietly rerouted out from under you without making a single sound. My name is Arthur Vance. I'm 64 years old. I spent 36 of those years working as a senior forensic auditor and fraud investigator for the State Department of Revenue. That means I spent my entire adult life looking at paper, bank statements, corporate ledgers, tax returns, and property deeds where one missing signature, one altered date, or one rerouted document could hide $1 million in stolen assets. You get an eye for quiet anomalies over 36 years. You learn that when someone wants to take something from you without putting up a fight, they don't break down your front door with a sledgehammer. They change the paper path. They intercept the warnings, redirect the notices, and let the silence do the heavy lifting until you wake up one morning with no roof left over your head. I thought I knew my own household the exact same way. It's a 4-bedroom stone craftsman built in 1962, sitting on 35 acres of prime oak timber and rolling pasture at the end of Mill Creek Road. Cedar shake shingles, a field stone chimney, and a wide front porch where my late wife, Martha, spent 30 summers painting watercolors of the valley below. Martha passed away 3 years ago after a long, quiet fight with illness that left the big timbered living room feeling far too large and far too cold. I stayed on the land because every square foot held her touch. The stone herb garden behind the kitchen, the hand-carved maple banister along the staircase, and the cedar gun cabinet in my office where our family papers were neatly filed away in steel drawers. Our daughter, Clara, was 34. She was a vice president of marketing for a regional commercial development firm downtown. Sharp, impeccably tailored, hyper-ambitious, and married to a man named Greg whom I'd spent 6 years trying to respect and 4 years trying to tolerate. Greg called himself a boutique private wealth advisor, which, near as I could tell from his tailored Italian suits and expensive leased sports cars, meant he brokered speculative real estate ventures using borrowed capital and other people's life savings. It was a sharp, frost-covered Thursday morning at 7 a.m. when the heavy iron knocker on my front door rattled through the empty house. I was sitting at the oak kitchen table, pouring my second cup of black coffee, wearing my flannel robe and reading glasses. I wasn't expecting anyone. Mill Creek Road is a dead-end gravel track, and at 7 in the morning, the only sound you usually hear is the wind coming off the ridge and the crows calling from the high pines. I set my mug down, walked through the hallway, and pulled open the heavy oak door. Standing on the porch steps in the gray early light was Jim Miller. Jim was 58, wearing his dark blue postal jacket with the brass emblem on the sleeve, heavy leather boots, and a wool cap pulled down over his ears. Jim had carried the mail along Mill Creek Road for 22 years. He knew every dog, every fence line, and every family name from the county highway all the way to the state line. He'd delivered Martha's birthday cards, Clara's college acceptance letters, and Martha's death certificate notices 3 years ago. "Jim," I said, blinking against the cold air. "You're out early this morning. The post office didn't change your route hours, did they?" Jim didn't smile. He didn't offer his usual casual greeting about the weather or the deer down in the bottom pasture. He stood on the porch, his breath rising in white clouds in the freezing air, holding an official government manila envelope with a clear plastic window on the front. "Arthur," Jim said, his voice low, gravelly, and tight with a strange, unnatural tension. "I'm sorry to bother you before breakfast, but I took this off the sorting rack at the central facility at 5 o'clock this morning." "What is it, Jim?" I asked, stepping back to let the door rest open. "A certified tax assessment." Jim didn't step inside. He reached out with a gloved hand and handed me the manila envelope. "Look at the processing stamp on the top corner, Arthur," Jim said, his voice dropping into a raspy whisper that cut straight through the morning chill. "And then look at where your mail is supposed to be going starting midnight tonight." I pulled my reading glasses out of my robe pocket, slipped them onto my nose, and looked down at the white government form visible through the plastic window. It was an official United States Postal Service Form 3575, a permanent change of address order. The document declared that I, Arthur E. Vance, had formally requested that all incoming residential mail, bank statements, tax notices, pension checks, and legal correspondence addressed to 104 Mill Creek Road be immediately rerouted, intercepted, and forwarded to a private commercial mail facility downtown, Box 412 at the Grand Plaza Building. The digital confirmation code was stamped in purple ink, USPSCOA approved. And the signature printed on the bottom authorization line was a clean, electronic rendering of my name, Arthur E. Vance. I stared at the paper. The letters swam in front of my eyes for 3 seconds before my 36 years of forensic auditing experience kicked in, freezing the blood in my veins. Jim. I breathed, my throat going dry as bone. I didn't file this. I've lived on Mill Creek Road for 32 years. I haven't filed a change of address since I left the State Revenue Department. Jim leaned closer, pointing a thick, calloused finger at the small barcode printed alongside the confirmation number. I know you didn't file it, Arthur, Jim whispered, his eyes wide and hard behind his wire-rimmed glasses. Because the request wasn't filed at the local post office counter. It was submitted online through the automated web portal 3 days ago using a credit card registered to an IP address downtown. And that's not the worst of it. Jim pulled a second slip of paper from his coat pocket, a yellow internal carrier notification slip. Under this specific commercial forwarding code, Jim said, his voice trembling slightly, it isn't just standard letters being redirected. It's an exclusive full-sweep forwarding order. That means starting tomorrow morning, your bank accounts, your property tax assessment statements, your county land registry notices, and your medical insurance notices are completely blocked from arriving at your mailbox. As far as the postal system is concerned, Arthur, you don't live in this house anymore. A cold sensation, sharp and thin as a razor blade, slid straight down my spine. Jim, I said, holding the manila envelope tight in my fingers, who paid the credit card processing fee for the online portal submission? Jim looked around the empty front yard, where the morning frost was glistening on the grass, before stepping up onto the top porch step. The carrier log doesn't show the full card number, Arthur, Jim said softly. It just shows the account holder's name attached to the digital signature line. The payment was authorized under an account belonging to Apex Global Management, LLC, care of Gregory Miller. Greg. My son-in-law. The name floated in the freezing air between us like a cloud of poison gas. Greg. I murmured, my mind racing through 3 decades of financial audits, title transfers, and property records. Greg filed an automated mail sweep on my house 3 days ago. Arthur, Jim said, his face grave and solemn. I've seen this happen once before. About 10 years ago down in the south end of the county. A developer filed a fraudulent mail redirect on an elderly widow's address. While she was sitting in her house wondering why her electric bills and bank statements stopped coming, the developer was intercepting her tax delinquency notices at a commercial box downtown. By the time she found out what was happening, the county had auctioned her land off for unpaid back taxes on the courthouse steps, and the developer bought the deed for pennies on the dollar. Light, harsh, filthy, and ice-cold, finally broke through the fog in my mind. It wasn't about missing a couple of utility bills or an electric statement. It was about 35 acres of timberland sitting at the edge of the municipal development corridor, land currently valued at nearly $3.5 million due to a new commercial highway bypass planned by the county board. Greg's private wealth firm wasn't managing wealth. He was drowning in debt, facing margin calls on speculative commercial leases downtown, and he had targeted the one piece of unencumbered real estate and clear timber equity left in the family, my farm. If Greg intercepted my mail for 90 days, he could redirect the county tax reassessment notice, fake a certified delinquency warning, intercept the bank's mortgage clearance updates, and use a forged power of attorney filing to execute an administrative land transfer before I ever knew a single paper had been filed. Jim, I said, looking my old friend straight in the eye. Is this change of address order active in the central system right now? It goes into full automated effect at midnight tonight, Arthur, Jim said, checking his watch. Unless the actual property owner signs a physical Form 1500 in-person fraud cancellation directly at the central post office counter downtown before the noon processing window. Then we have 5 hours, I said quietly. 5 hours, Jim nodded grimly. And Arthur, if I were you, I'd check your steel filing cabinets in your office. Because if Greg felt bold enough to file a federal mail redirect on your house, he didn't do it without getting his hands on your property deed first. My phone rang inside my robe pocket. The sharp, loud electronic chime shattered the silence of the porch like a heavy stone thrown through a plate glass window. I stood there for 3 seconds, unable to move, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird inside a cage. Slowly, with a hand that felt completely cold and numb, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the phone. The caller ID displayed a name I knew better than my own. Clara. My thumb hovered over the green button. My breath came short, shallow, and cold in my chest. I pressed the button and brought the phone to my ear. Dad. It was Clara's voice. But it wasn't the easy, affectionate tone she used when she called to ask if I needed anything from the grocery store downtown. Her voice was sharp, clipped, heavy, and dripping with a strange, unnatural tension. Hello, Clara, I said quietly, keeping my voice as steady as reinforced concrete. Dad, are you at home right now? She asked instantly, the sound of keyboard keys clicking rapidly in the background over the receiver. Did Jim deliver the mail yet this morning? I looked at Jim Miller standing beside me on the frost-covered porch steps, his eyes locked on mine, his head shaking once in a silent, emphatic warning. Not yet, Clara, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He usually doesn't come up Mill Creek Road until 11. Is something wrong? There was a long, heavy pause on the line. I heard the faint rustle of legal paper in the background, and then the distinct, low rumble of Greg's voice speaking to someone in the office beside her. Nothing's wrong, Dad, Clara said, her voice tightening visibly over the line. Good. Because Greg and I are driving up to the house at 12 o'clock today with our estate attorney. We need you to sign a routine administrative property audit release before the county land registry office closes at 4. The phone went dead with a flat, electronic click. I stood on the frost-covered porch holding the silent phone against my ear, the cold morning wind biting through my flannel robe. Jim Miller stood beside me, his blue postal jacket zipped to his chin, his eyes locked on mine with a mixture of quiet outrage and grave concern. They're coming at noon, Arthur, Jim said softly, his breath rising in a white cloud. They think they've got 5 hours before you ever figure out why your mail stopped coming. They think I'm an old man sitting by a cold stove, Jim, I said, my voice dropping into that quiet, steady register I used when auditing fraudulent offshore tax shelters. They don't know you intercepted the forwarding form at 5 o'clock this morning. I looked down at the manila envelope in my hand, the USPS Form 3575 bearing the electronic signature and the credit card authorization from Apex Global Management, LLC. Jim, I said, turning to my old friend. I need you to do 2 things for me right now. Name it, Arthur. Jim replied without hesitating. First, drive straight back to the Central Postal Facility downtown. Tell Postal Inspector Thomas Vance, my late wife's nephew, that I need him to process a Form 1500 in-person fraud cancellation and flag Form 3575 as an active federal mail fraud evidence file. Jim's eyes widened slightly behind his spectacles. Postal Inspection Service? Arthur, federal mail fraud carries a mandatory 5-year federal prison sentence per intercepted item. I spent 36 years as a state auditor, Jim, I said, looking out over my 35 acres of frost-dusted timber. I don't play around with amateur thieves. And the second thing, Jim, I need you to bring Inspector Vance back up Mill Creek Road before 11:30. Tell him to park behind the pine line near the old timber bridge. He'll be here, Arthur, Jim said grimly, giving my forearm a firm squeeze. I'll make sure he brings a team with him. I watched Jim's white postal truck roll down the gravel driveway, its tires crunching softly over the frost, before turning onto Mill Creek Road and disappearing toward the county highway. I stepped back inside the warmth of my house, closed the heavy oak door, and locked the deadbolt. I didn't panic. I didn't rush around. 36 years of auditing high-stakes corporate fraud teaches you that when an enemy tries to execute a paper-path takeover, you don't fight them on their terms. You let them bring their fraudulent documents directly to your table, you let them commit the act on camera, and then you close the trap around them. I walked down the central hallway toward my private office at the rear of the house. The office was a quiet, wood-paneled room lined with brass-bound bookshelves, framed county commendation plaques, and a large cedar desk where I kept my personal records. In the corner sat my fireproof steel filing cabinet, a heavy, 4-drawer document safe with a 3-combination mechanical lock. I knelt down in front of the cabinet, dialed the 3-number code, 1-0-2-4-6-2, the date of my marriage to Martha, and pulled open the top drawer. My hands froze on the steel handles. The heavy leather binder containing the original land grant deed for 104 Mill Creek Road, a document signed in 1962, was missing. Beside it, the red expandable folder holding my certified property tax receipts, my paid-in-full mortgage release statements, and my personal estate trust documents had been pulled from its hanging folder. Tucked inside the empty slot was a thin, white slip of paper, a duplicate key receipt from a downtown locksmith shop, dated 3 weeks ago. I pulled the white slip out and held it up to the desk lamp. Clara had used her old spare house key while I was out at my weekly retired auditor's breakfast 3 weeks prior. She had unlocked the office, used a locksmith's duplicate key to open my steel filing cabinet, and stolen the original land title deeds. They had the original deed. They had filed an automated federal mail sweep on my address. And at 12 o'clock today, they were arriving with an estate attorney to force me to sign a routine administrative property audit release, a document that would waive my right to notice when the county land registry processed a fraudulent title transfer. I sat back on my heels in the quiet office, looking at the empty hanging folder. "Clara," I whispered, the bitterness of the betrayal settling deep into my bones. "You sold your father's house for a man who wears leased suits." I stood up, walked over to my cedar desk, and picked up my telephone. I didn't call the local police dispatch. I called a direct private line at the State Bureau of Financial Regulation downtown, a line answered by Special Agent Sarah Jenkins, a sharp, tenacious investigator whom I had mentored 15 years ago when she first joined the State Audit Division. "Sarah," I said quietly when she picked up. "It's Arthur Vance." "Arthur." Sarah's voice came through warm and clear over the line. "It's good to hear your voice. How is retirement treating you on Mill Creek Road?" "Retirement was quiet until 7 o'clock this morning, Sarah," I said. "Right now, my son-in-law, Greg Miller, and his shell company, Apex Global Management, are executing a fraudulent land grab on my 35-acre farm using an illegal federal mail redirect and stolen property deeds." There was an immediate, sharp silence on the line. I heard the scuff of a chair being pulled close to a desk, followed by the rapid tapping of a computer keyboard. "Apex Global Management," Sarah repeated, her voice dropping into a tense, professional register. "Arthur, we've been running a confidential preliminary inquiry on Greg Miller's firm for 3 months. He defaulted on a $1.2 million commercial mezzanine loan on a riverfront development project downtown 2 weeks ago. His creditors filed a formal demand for collateral assets on Monday." "He doesn't have collateral assets, Sarah," I explained, looking out my office window at the silver maple trees. "That's why he filed a USPS change of address order on my house 3 days ago. He's intercepting my tax notices and land registry updates so he can pledge my 35 acres as substitute loan collateral before his creditors seize his firm's bank accounts." "That's felony wire fraud and federal mail interception, Arthur," Sarah stated, her tone sharp as broken glass. "Does he have your signature on an assignment agreement?" "He's coming up my driveway at 12 o'clock today with an attorney to force me to sign a casualty release," I said. "He thinks my mail is already being redirected to his commercial box downtown." Sarah didn't hesitate. "I'm pulling 2 tactical investigators and calling Federal Postal Inspector Thomas Vance right now. We will have a mobile surveillance unit parked at the bottom of Mill Creek Road by 11:15. Arthur, do not sign a single sheet of paper. Keep them on your front porch until we deploy the signal jamming array and secure the perimeter. I won't sign a thing, Sarah, I said. I'll be waiting on the porch. By 11:30, the sun had burned through the morning fog, leaving a pale, freezing blue sky over the valley. Jim Miller's white postal truck pulled quietly into the lower clearing behind the timber bridge, accompanied by an unmarked black sedan carrying Postal Inspector Thomas Vance and Special Agent Sarah Jenkins. They parked out of sight behind the thick pine line, deploying a mobile digital recording array to monitor the front porch. At 11:58, the sharp crunch of tires on gravel echoed up the driveway. A dark blue European luxury sedan, Greg's least pride and joy, pulled into my yard, parking at an aggressive angle that blocked my pickup truck in the carport. 3 doors opened almost simultaneously. Greg stepped out of the driver's seat. He was 38, wearing a tailored navy coat over an open-collared designer shirt, holding a sleek leather document portfolio under his arm. He adjusted his silk tie with a practiced, arrogant gesture, looking around the property with the calculating eye of a man measuring land for bulldozers. From the passenger side stepped Clara, my daughter, my only child. She wore a camel hair coat, her dark hair pulled back into a tight, flawless bun, carrying a red expandable accordion folder. Her face was pale, rigid, and set in a mask of forced composure. And from the rear door stepped a third man, a stooped, narrow-faced attorney in his late 50s wearing a pinstriped suit, carrying a heavy leather briefcase. I didn't wait for them to knock. I pulled open the heavy oak door and stepped out onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind me. I stood at the top of the wooden steps, holding my canvas work jacket tight against the cold wind, looking down at them. Dad! Clara called out, stepping up the flagstone path with a tight, artificial smile that didn't reach her eyes. You're outside. We tried calling you on your cell phone while we were driving up the highway. I left my phone inside, Clara, I said, keeping my tone perfectly flat. What brings you out to Mill Creek Road on a Thursday morning? Greg stepped up beside her, offering a wide politician's smile that glinted in the cold sunlight. Arthur, Greg said, his voice smooth and dripping with artificial warmth. Good to see you looking so well. We brought Mr. Sterling from Sterling & Associates. We need to wrap up a quick administrative item regarding the property trust before the county offices close for the weekend. The narrow-faced lawyer stepped forward, tapping his leather briefcase. Mr. Vance, I have the routine administrative audit release and title clarification documents here. As requested by your daughter, this form streamlines local property tax assessments and authorizes administrative representation for regional utility corridor adjustments. I looked at the silver pen in the lawyer's hand. Then I looked at Clara. An administrative property audit release, Clara? I asked softly, my voice carrying clean over the cold wind. Why would a tax assessment require me to assign my land management authority to Greg's firm downtown? Clara's smile froze instantly. A tiny, involuntary twitch flickered at the corner of her eye. Dad, don't be difficult, Clara said quickly, taking a step up onto the porch steps. It's standard estate planning paperwork. Greg's firm is handling the restructuring so you don't have to worry about county tax reassessments or timber maintenance anymore. And if I refuse to sign it, Greg? I asked, looking straight at my son-in-law. Greg took an aggressive step forward, his smooth smile vanishing, replaced by a cold, arrogant sneer. Arthur, let's stop playing games, Greg said, his voice dropping into a low, vicious murmur. Your mail is already being redirected to my commercial box downtown as of this morning. You won't receive another property tax bill, bank statement, or county notice at this address. You're 64, you live alone, and you don't have the legal resources to fight a contested title transfer. Sign the document, take the monthly annuity payment we've structured for you, and let us handle the land. Evelyn, Clara, didn't stop him. She didn't flinch. She just held out the red accordion folder and pointed the silver pen at the signature line. Sign it, Dad, Clara whispered, her voice cold as winter ice. Sign it now, or we do this through the probate court. I looked at my daughter, the girl I had carried on my shoulders through the high grass of the lower pasture, the girl whose college education I had paid for with 36 years of honest state service, and I felt something inside my chest lock into place like a steel vault door. "I'm not signing a single line, Clara," I said quietly. "And your mail redirect order was cancelled 2 hours ago." Greg's face didn't just turn pale, it transformed into a gray, featureless sheet of panic. His thumb flicked nervously against the leather seam of his portfolio, his polished corporate posture collapsing as his eyes darted from my face to the long gravel driveway behind him. "What do you mean, cancelled?" Greg stammered, his voice losing every trace of its practiced, smooth resonance. "That's an automated postal order processed through a commercial server. You don't even have an online dashboard account." "I don't need a dashboard account, Greg," I said, stepping down onto the second wooden stair, my hands resting easily inside my jacket pockets. "I have Jim Miller. Jim's carried the mail on Mill Creek Road for 22 years, and he knows how to read an administrative carrier log at 5 o'clock in the morning." Clara took a sharp step back, her camel hair coat catching on the wooden corner of the porch railing. Her eyes widened as she looked at me, a sudden, desperate realization dawning behind her gaze. "Dad," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything, Clara," I replied, keeping my voice as flat and unyielding as a granite ledger. "You did. You used your spare key to open my office filing cabinet 3 weeks ago, stole the original land grant deed, and handed it to a man who thought he could intercept federal mail to hide a land theft." From down at the timber bridge, the deep rumble of heavy engines shattered the cold silence of the valley. 2 dark, unmarked sedans and a marked United States Postal Inspection Service SUV surged around the bend of Mill Creek Road. Their tires threw showers of wet gravel as they accelerated up the driveway, sweeping in behind Greg's leased European sports car and blocking it completely. 4 officers wearing dark tactical windbreakers bearing bold gold lettering, U.S. Postal Inspection Service and State Financial Crimes Division, stepped out of the vehicles with drawn sidearms and official search warrants held high. At the head of the squad walked Postal Inspector Thomas Vance, holding a thick leather evidence pouch, flanked by Special Agent Sarah Jenkins. "Gregory Miller. Clara Vance Miller." Inspector Vance's voice boomed through a portable megaphone, echoing off the stone walls of the house and reverberating through the high pines. "Keep your hands visible and step away from the porch immediately. This area is a federal evidence zone." The narrow-faced attorney in the pinstriped suit didn't hesitate for a single second. He dropped his heavy briefcase straight onto the frost-dusted flagstones, raised both hands high into the air, and backed away toward the boxwood hedges. "I have no operational affiliation with Apex Global Management," the lawyer shouted, his voice cracking into a high-pitched panic. "I was retained 30 minutes ago strictly to witness a voluntary signature. I have no knowledge of any fraudulent postal filings." "Shut up, Sterling," Greg spat, turning on the lawyer with an animal snarl. "You drafted the casualty assignment clause. You took a $15,000 wire transfer from our escrow account this morning. Keep your hands where we can see them, Mr. Miller," Inspector Vance commanded, closing the distance up the flagstone path. 2 postal inspectors moved in with practiced mechanical efficiency. One officer forced Greg down onto his knees on the freezing gravel, pinned his right arm behind his back, and pulled his leather portfolio from beneath his arm. The second officer pulled his wrists back and secured them in heavy steel handcuffs with a loud, "Gregory Miller," Inspector Vance read from a laminated card pulled from his vest, "you are under arrest for federal mail fraud under Title 18 of the United States Code, identity theft, attempted grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. You have the right to remain silent." "Dad!" Clara shrieked, turning toward me on the porch steps, her hands clutched against her chest as tears cut clean tracks through her makeup. "Dad, tell them to stop. You know Greg. His firm was facing a receivership order downtown. He was just trying to secure short-term collateral to save his business. He was going to transfer the title back to you in 6 months." I stood on the wooden step, looking down at my daughter. 36 years as a senior state auditor teaches you that when a fraudster gets caught red-handed inside a paper trail, they never weep for the victim they tried to rob. They weep because the numbers stopped lying for them. In 6 months, Clara? I asked, my voice cutting clean through the cold mountain air. In 6 months, the county highway bypass easement clears. By the time I realized my tax statements were missing from my mailbox, Greg would have sold the timber rights to a commercial contractor, defaulted on his substitute loan, and let the bank foreclose on your mother's land. We weren't going to let them take the house. Clara sobbed, her voice breaking into ragged gasps. We were just going to pledge the lower 30 acres as loan guarantee equity. We needed your signature on the audit release so the title company wouldn't flag the change of address order. Special Agent Sarah Jenkins stepped onto the porch steps, holding her digital recording unit in one hand and a copy of the emergency search warrant in the other. You just confessed to a federal mail interception conspiracy on an active audio channel, Mrs. Miller, Agent Jenkins said quietly. A third officer stepped up behind Clara, pulled her arms gently behind her back, and clicked a pair of steel handcuffs around her wrists. She didn't fight. She didn't yell anymore. She just sagged toward the flagstones, her camel hair coat smearing against the wet oak post of the porch, crying uncontrollably as she was guided down the path toward the second unmarked sedan. Greg was hauled to his feet by 2 postal inspectors. His tailored navy coat was ruined with mud and gravel, his dark hair falling across his forehead, his face contorted into a mask of pure, bitter rage as he glared up at me on the steps. You think you won something today, old man? Greg spat, his voice raspy and bitter. You're a 64-year-old retired clerk sitting alone in a cold house on 35 acres of dirt. You've got nothing left. I have my home, Greg, I said, looking him straight in the eye as the officer shoved him into the back seat of the postal SUV. And I have an unbroken paper trail. That's 2 things you'll never own. Within 15 minutes, the driveway cleared out. The unmarked sedans and the postal SUV backed down Mill Creek Road, carrying Greg, Clara, and their attorney toward the federal courthouse downtown. Jim Miller's white postal truck remained parked in the driveway. Jim stepped out from behind the pine trees, holding his carrier clipboard, and walked up the porch steps toward me. Inspector Vance has the Form 3575 log locked in the federal evidence locker, Arthur, Jim said softly, offering a faint, sad smile. That paper trail is sealed tight. Thanks, Jim, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. For coming up the hill at 7 o'clock. I deliver the mail, Arthur, Jim said, giving my shoulder a gentle pat. Rain, sleet, snow, or fraud. You take care of yourself. I watched Jim's truck roll down the lane and disappear over the timber bridge. I was left standing alone on my front porch under the cold, pale blue sky. The frost on the grass had melted, leaving the morning soil dark, damp, and quiet. I walked inside, closed the heavy oak door, and locked the deadbolt behind me. I walked down the central hallway to my office, knelt down by my fireproof filing cabinet, and looked into the empty hanging folder where my land grant deed used to sit. My phone chimed softly on my desk. It was a text message from Special Agent Sarah Jenkins. Greg Miller held without bail on federal mail fraud and grand larceny counts. Clara's attorney negotiated a full statement in exchange for a secondary plea. State Financial Crimes Unit executing search warrants on Apex Global Management offices right now. I set the phone down on the desk, sat in my leather chair, and looked out the window at the silver maple trees. I didn't feel revenge. I didn't feel triumph. I felt the quiet, heavy peace of a man who had spent 36 years looking at paper trails, a man who understood that when someone tries to rewrite your life by changing your address, you don't weep over the envelope. You hold the line, you stand on your own soil, and you let the truth finish the record. The federal justice system moves with a cold, relentless momentum that no corporate marketing firm or luxury lifestyle can stall. Once a federal mail fraud warrant under Title 18 of the United States Code is executed, the paper trail doesn't just reveal the immediate crime, it pulls back the curtain on every hidden transaction, every shell account, and every forged signature trailing behind it. Over the next 4 weeks, the quiet routine of my life on Mill Creek Road was punctuated by the steady arrival of official federal summonses, process servers, and forensic accounting investigators working alongside Special Agent Sarah Jenkins and Postal Inspector Thomas Vance. Greg Miller's boutique wealth firm, Apex Global Management, LLC, collapsed into bankruptcy within 72 hours of his arrest on my front porch. When state and federal examiners executed search warrants on his third-floor office suite downtown, they uncovered a mountain of financial rot. Greg hadn't just defaulted on his $1.2 million commercial mezzanine loan, he had been operating a classical Ponzi scheme across 3 separate investor groups, using new client capital to pay off short-term interest debts while staging elaborate investor dinners to maintain the illusion of prosperity. He was facing 16 federal counts, including wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, postal interception, and grand larceny. His defense team attempted to file a petition for pre-trial bail, citing his lack of a prior violent record. But the presiding magistrate took one look at the evidence presented by Inspector Vance, the digital carrier logs, the Form 3575, audit trail, and Sarah Jenkins's recording of the porch confrontation, and denied bail entirely. Greg was remanded to the Federal Detention Center to await formal indictment and trial. Clara's legal trajectory took a different, deeply painful path. Because she had not personally initiated the online postal change of address order and possessed no prior criminal record, federal prosecutors offered her a formal plea agreement. If she provided a complete, sworn deposition detailing Greg's financial collapse, the theft of my land grant deed, and the planning behind the forced audit release, the federal mail fraud count against her would be reduced to secondary imprisonment of a felony and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. Her attorney, a sharp, gray-haired federal defender retained through her remaining liquid savings, called me on a damp Tuesday morning in early December, asking if I would be willing to meet with Clara in a private consultation room at the federal courthouse before her formal plea hearing. I sat by the window in my kitchen for a long time, looking out at the frost-dusted pasture where Martha and I used to watch the deer graze in the late afternoon. Every auditing instinct I had developed over 36 years told me that once a ledger is corrupted beyond repair, you don't keep adding entries to the same page. You close the book and set it aside. But Martha's memory lived in every corner of this house, the memory of a mother who had spent 34 years teaching her daughter to walk with honesty and grace. I drove my pickup truck down to the federal courthouse on a cold, overcast morning, the heater blowing warm air against my boots. The consultation room was small, stark, and smelled of commercial disinfectant and industrial carpet cleaner. Clara sat on the far side of a long oak table wearing a plain gray inmate jumpsuit, her hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, her face pale, sunken, and free of any makeup. She looked up when I walked in, her lower lip trembling violently. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely carrying across the room. I sat down in the wooden chair opposite her, keeping my hands resting flat on the table. "Hello, Clara," I said quietly. "Dad." "I didn't know he was going to file a full mail sweep," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking underneath the heavy fabric of the jumpsuit. "I swear to God, Dad, I thought he was just redirecting the county tax notices. Greg told me. He told me it was just a temporary administrative hold. He said if we could pledge the 35 acres as substitute collateral for 60 days, his riverfront financing would clear, he'd pay off the bridge loan, and we'd put the deed back in your filing cabinet without you ever knowing." I looked at my daughter across the table. "Clara," I said, my voice steady, slow, and absolute. "You used your spare key to break into my office cabinet while I was eating breakfast downtown. You stole your late mother's original land grant deed and handed it to a man who thought he could erase my presence from my own mailbox. Whether you thought it was 60 days or 60 years, you were willing to gamble your father's home to protect a life built on borrowed money." Clara couldn't answer. She sat in the cold light of the room, crying quietly into her hands. "Why didn't you just come to me, Clara?" I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. "Why didn't you sit at the kitchen table and tell me you were drowning?" "Because Greg said you'd look down on us," she sobbed, her eyes raw and bloodshot as she looked up at me. "He said you always judge his business. He said you cared more about 35 acres of timber and your old routine than you ever cared about my lifestyle or my status." I closed my eyes for 3 long seconds, taking a slow, deep breath. I spent 36 years auditing corporate fraud so you could grow up in a home that wasn't built on debt, Clara, I said softly, opening my eyes to look straight into hers. I didn't judge Greg because he was ambitious. I judged him because I watched him spend 6 years treating other people's lives and property like poker chips. I stood up from the wooden chair, buttoning my heavy canvas jacket against the room's chill. Your mother left this farm to be a sanctuary, I told her quietly. The land trust I've established will ensure it remains a sanctuary long after I'm gone. I hope you find a way to rebuild your life when your sentence is served, Clara. But the front door on Mill Creek Road is locked. I didn't wait for her response. I turned and walked out of the consultation room, down the marble corridors of the courthouse, and out into the crisp December air. By mid-January, the winter snow had fallen heavy and thick across the valley, coating the oak trees, the silver maples, and the gables of my stone craftsman in a pure, spotless blanket of white. The trial dates were formally set for the spring. Greg Miller faced a mandatory minimum sentence of 12 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Clara signed her plea agreement, accepting an 18-month sentence at a minimum security facility, followed by 3 years of supervised probation and full financial restitution to the court. The house on Mill Creek Road sat in deep, peaceful quiet. Jim Miller came up the driveway on a clear Saturday morning, not in his postal truck, but in his personal pickup, bringing a wooden crate of fresh cedar firewood he'd cut from his own lot. Together, we sat on the front porch with heavy ceramic mugs of hot coffee, watching the winter sun glint off the snow-covered fields. Mail's running smooth down the valley, Arthur, Jim said, setting his mug on the porch railing. The central facility cleared out the commercial redirection logs. Every letter coming down Mill Creek Road hits your box fair and square. Thanks to you, Jim, I said, looking out over the quiet woods. No, Arthur. Jim offered a faint, warm smile. Thanks to 36 years of keeping your record straight and knowing where you stand. After Jim drove back down the hill, I walked out to the front yard wearing my heavy work jacket and boots. I stood beside the stone herb garden Martha had built, feeling the cold, still air fill my lungs. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my heavy steel keyring, and looked down at the brass house key. It was worn along the edges, slightly scratched from decades of daily use, but it fit the lock of my oak door with a mechanical perfection that no paper trick or digital order could ever alter. I walked up the porch steps, stepped into the warm entryway, and closed the solid oak door behind me. I pushed the brass key into the deadbolt and turned it to the right. The heavy brass bolt shot forward into the solid oak frame, locking out the winter cold, securing the quiet warmth inside, and holding 36 years of honest living exactly where it belonged. Unbroken, unshaken, and completely standing on solid ground.